Hope I'm ready for this fight. Okay, that's phase 2. He has shields. Alright, what you guys just saw was a sneak peek at the upcoming boss fight that you guys are going to be able to make in your own worlds. That's right, you guys are going to be able to copy these commands and add that Blazing Inferno boss to your own world. Now, once again, if you guys want to see the full fight, it's going to be at the end of the video, as always with my boss fight videos. But let's give a little explanation of what's actually happening in the boss fight, and then you guys are going to see the commands. So what we're doing is just actually summon this guy in. We're taking this block of netherite and dropping a blaze rod on it. It's going to warm up for a few seconds before striking with lightning and summoning in our blaze boss. As you can see, he's going to start right off by just shooting fireballs at us. Now, the interesting thing about these fireballs is when they blow up, when they land, they actually shoot off in all 4 directions at once. So not only do you have to be dodging these fireballs, you actually have to be paying attention to where they land and make sure you're not in a direct line because these things actually can do a lot of damage. As you guys can see, there's a lot of particle effects, so this is a really visually interesting boss. I quite like it. It's quite a fun boss to fight. It is quite difficult though to actually be constantly dodging, and I also did the whole fight in netherite armor and had to use golden apples to get by. So yeah, that's phase 1. It's pretty simple. He has normal blaze AI, of course. Like I said, the wildfire boss is kind of what we're going with. So I'm gonna knock him down to phase 2. So phase 2 is gonna have a couple of changes. The first one is gonna get struck by lightning at the very beginning, just to show you it's phase 2. Then he's actually going to shoot fireballs less often than in phase 1, but I'm going to show you why. So you're going to see, number 1, that he has these 3 flames that are circling around him. Now these 3 flames can actually block arrows. Here, I'm going to show you the fireball. So when the fireball actually lands, instead of just blowing up, it's actually going to create a second fireball. So every time he shoots his fireball, it's going to shoot another fireball. So it's going to land, and it's going to home onto the player and like fire in the direction of the player. It's hard to tell when I'm flying, but I'll land on the ground to let him fire off that second round of fireballs at me. So I'm going to dodge to the left so it goes past me. Even though it went past me, the second one's going to be facing whichever direction I am. So it's actually going to be, you're going to have to pay attention to where the fireball lands and then where the second fireball lands, which makes it a lot to avoid as you're trying to fight this guy. Additionally, now you are able to get some arrows pass. As you can see, I actually did damage to him that time, but not that time. So you're going to be able to inconsistently hit him with arrows because of these circling shields. Sometimes you'll find a gap, sometimes you won't, but it's really going to encourage you to try and get up closer to this guy during the second phase. He is shooting those big fireballs less, but once again, they are double fireballs, so you actually have to be avoiding even more per fireball. So on top of that, these shields will also damage you. So even though you do want to kind of get up close to do melee, you don't want to actually get hit by these things or you're going to be taking extra damage. But yeah, that's kind of it for the actual tutorial. And voila, that's the special boss fight. So I hope you guys enjoyed that, and let's get into the commands. Now, if you guys have seen my other boss fight tutorials, you're going to recognize some of these commands because the summoning commands are pretty much going to be the exact same that you've seen before. So first things first is we're just looking at the blaze rod. Basically, if there's an item named blaze rod that's on top of a netherite block, it's going to add up this blaze score. So right now I'm going to show you the scoreboard, and you guys are going to see it on the side of your screen. So when I throw this on here, it's going to start adding up. If it gets to 10, it's going to do the summon. I'm going to cancel it by picking it up early. So once it's basically adding up, when it's between 1 and 10, it's going to be showing out those particles that are on the knockback of roar. One thing I forgot to mention, this is on a 5-tick delay, that being the repeating command. The rest of the green chain commands are not. Going back to it, we're basically looking, like I said, is this blaze rod on a score of 1 to 10? That means it's yet to summon the boss. If so, it's going to do some particle effects. Same command right here, except it's playing a sound instead of the actual, like, particles, just playing sound. Next up, when it hits blaze level 11, it's going to summon a lightning bolt. So this is just going to be a little bit of an extra kind of visual display, essentially. And that's going to be followed by the actual summoning of the blaze. We're calling it wildfire. Finally, we have this command up here, which is just going to constantly be giving the wildfire a bigger head than a normal blaze. So if you guys didn't notice, I'll summon it in. This guy has a big head. A normal blaze has a head like this. The wildfire has a big head. It's not that big of a difference, but, just a little bit of a visual difference on top of, the flaming shields that come in phase 2. Okay, next up, we're just going to be giving some extra health, some extra effects to the blaze. So the first thing that we're going to be doing is just giving it a health boost. Now, we're going to make sure it's anything named wildfire that does not have the tag blaze, because we only want to do this once, or else it's going to be constantly healing. We don't want that. After the health boost, we're going to fill in the extra health by giving the blaze instant health. Next up, we're going to give it a totem in the offhand. This is how we check when you've done enough damage to knock it down to phase 2. And finally, after all that, we're just going to give it the tag blaze. This just means that, hey, it's done all the summoning stuff, it has a totem, it has the effects, we are ready to actually enter phase 2. Or phase 1, I should say. Then, phase 1 has some big fancy fireball stuff. So, let's get into that now. So the first thing that we're going to do is be constantly removing one blaze score from the actual blaze, and it's going to be on a 10 tick delay. So this is going to be the actual cooldown for the fireball attack. So what we're going to see here is I'm going to summon this guy in, it's going to count up, you guys look on the right side of the screen. Now you're going to see two scoreboards. One of them is the actual fireball, and then the fire trails, and then one of them is the actual cooldown on the blaze. So right now you can see it's at 0, so it's going to fire right again afterwards. It's going to be basically one of these numbers. So the numbers are going to be for the actual fireball, the fire trails, and the blaze's cooldown. We're just using the same scoreboard, so it's less redundant. But that's essentially what's happening with the actual fireballs. So essentially, it's going to have this little animation that plays whenever the blaze score is -1. That means the blaze is ready to fire. Then when the blaze scores at -1, it's going to go a little bit above its head, and it's going to summon an armor stand named Firebomb. This is going to be the fireball. So essentially, when it's ready to fire, it's going to summon an armor stand above its head. We're going to instantly give this armor stand invisibility, so that way you can't see it. Then we're going to essentially reset the score of the blaze. So we're going to have it choose a random number between 4 and 17. This is the minimum and the maximum. So essentially, because remember we did this on a 10 tick delay, so up here at the random, it's going to be between 4 half seconds. So the cooldown is going to be between 4 half seconds and 17 half seconds. So that would be about 2 seconds or about 8.5 seconds. It's going to choose a random number in between, and that's going to be the cooldown for it to fire again. So if you guys want to make this cooldown longer, you think it fires too fast, make either of these numbers bigger. If you want it to fire more often, make these numbers lower. That's up to you guys. Now, one thing you will notice is that I have tag equals not phase 2. Because if you remember, I said during the boss fight, phase 2 is going to be a little bit different. Because you're shooting double fireballs, it's not going to be fireballing nearly as often, because it would be way too difficult. So, this is checking if it does not have the tag phase 2. The next command is going to be if it does have the tag phase 2. So, all we're doing here is just making the number, we're keeping the minimum number the same, but the maximum number higher. This is just going to be, once again, the same thing. It's going to choose a random number between these two, and boom, that's the new timer before it fires again. Next up, what we're going to be doing is looking at the firebomb as it's spawning. If the blaze itself is on phase 2, it's actually going to give a special tag to the firebomb. That tag is going to be respawn. Essentially what this means is it checks, is this a phase 1 or a phase 2 fireball? If it's a phase 2 fireball, it's going to get a special tag, meaning that when it blows up the first time, instead of just blowing up, it's actually going to summon a second one. So that's how we're actually summoning in the fireball. So let's look at what the fireball is actually doing now. So all we're going to be doing for the first thing is have the fireball teleport to itself. You might be thinking that's a bit odd, but if you guys remember, when the blaze is about to do its fireball attack, it actually summons the fireball above it, and it waits there for a few seconds before launching off. This kind of indicates to the player, hey, get ready, it's about to attack. Next up, we're just going to be using this wind explosion emitter. This is just going to be simply the particle for the firebomb. Nothing too special going on here. Next up, we're going to be constantly adding the blaze score of 1. Notice this is on a 0 tick delay. We're going to be constantly adding the blaze score of 1 to the fireball. This is going to be the timer so that way it doesn't go on infinitely. We don't want an instance where somehow the fireball doesn't hit anything and it goes on forever into the void and lags up your world. This is just going to be mostly a timer to get rid of that in case it goes on too far. Additionally, this is going to be holding the fireball in place for the first 20 ticks of this. So while it's being held in place, it's going to be constantly teleporting facing the nearest player. That means as soon as it's ready to fire off, it's going to go in the direction that the player currently is. Then we're going to be teleporting it forward. Now, what we're going to be doing is we're actually going to be angling it down so that way as time goes on, the fireball is going to get more and more gravity. Unfortunately, with armor stands, arcing stuff doesn't always work quite right, so we're going to do some manual, basically arc trajectory stuff going on here. But once it has a 21 score or higher, that means it's 21 ticks into its attack. It's going to start teleporting itself forward, facing the nearest player. Or facing forward, it's not going to be tracking. And then, of course, we're just going to be giving it some extra particles as it's firing along. Don't worry about that. Next up, what we're going to be checking is the actual explosion. Basically, if the score is 21 or higher, that means it's like actually fired off the player, and a player is within 1.2 blocks, so essentially if it actually hits the player, it's going to give the armor stand the tag boom. Additionally, if it is no longer in air, that means it hits, like it lands on a block, it's also going to get the tag boom. This is just going to have it blow up on the ground, which actually happens far more often than hitting the player. Then if the score is 80 or above, because we don't want it to go on infinitely, it's just going to get rid of itself. Now, the last 3 commands we have in this chain are basically, like I said, for that extra trajectory. So if the score is 31 or higher, that means it's a little bit further into the trajectory. It's just going to teleport down a little bit. Additionally, once again, if it's 51 or higher, we're going to teleport it down even more. And finally, if it's 71 or higher, we're going to teleport it down even more. Like I said, this just makes it so the further along it travels, the more gravity it has. This is because we want the actual fireball to land on the ground, so that way you can do the fire trails you guys saw earlier. But that's more or less the trajectory for how the standard fireball is going to work. It's going to summon above the player for a bit, and then it's going to shoot off and slowly go towards the player, eventually hit the ground or the player. So next up, we're going to look at what actually happens when it explodes. So the first thing that's going to happen is when the firebomb has the tag boom, we're going to summon the armor stand fire 1. And then we're going to give the fire 1 the tag firewall. Then it's going to do the same thing. It's going to summon an armor stand named fire 2. It's going to give it the tag firewall. You guessed it. It's going to summon an armor stand named fire 3. Give it the tag firewall. And believe it or not, it's going to summon the armor stand fire 4 and give fire 4 the tag firewall. Essentially what we're doing here is making it so that it's going to summon an armor stand, and each armor stand is going to travel in a different direction. But because they're going to have some similar properties, we're going to give them all a tag. That way we can easily identify them, but we can also make sure they're teleporting in different directions. So we're also going to give anything with the tag firewall invisibility, so that way we don't actually see those fire trails. As it's exploding, we're going to play an explosion sound, obviously. And now, if that firebomb has the tag respawn, what's going to happen is it's going to summon another firebomb. So it's still actually killing the first firebomb and summoning a new one before it dies. So this is for what's happening in phase 2, to give it 2 fireballs for some really fun extra challenge. Next up, we're just going to once again give that firebomb invisibility because we don't want to see the second armor stand. And once again, these two only affect phase 2, not phase 1. Finally, for anything that has the tag boom and is firebomb, that means it's already exploded. It's just going to kill it. So all that we did there, in case you guys are not sure what just happened with that chain of commands, which is the longest part of this creation, when the fireball explodes, it's going to summon 4 armor stands. Each of them are going to get a different tag, And then if the fireball is a phase 2 fireball, it's going to summon another fireball. That's all that's happening. Try not to get lost. If you guys are confused, make sure you just copy it exactly how you see it, and it will work just fine for you. So next up, let's talk about the actual firewall, see what's going on here. So essentially what we're going to be doing is adding Blaze 1, the scoreboard, to each of the firewalls. Now this is going to be on a 10 tick delay. This right here is just the timer so the firewalls don't go on infinitely. Once they have a 10 or higher score on their firewall, it's just going to get rid of it because you don't want to go on infinitely. That would be laggy and annoying probably. Additionally, we're going to be running some particles at the firewall, so this is just campfire smoke particle, and yeah, nothing too fancy there. Once again, same thing, just different particle, because if you guys saw, there's like the smoke particle and the flame particle, so this is just all there is to it. Next up, we have the actual sounds. So basically, as the firewall is traveling along the ground, this is kind of going to also be an audio cue that, hey, you might be about to catch on fire by the firewalls. You might want to avoid doing that because fire hurts. Speaking of fire hurting, this is how the fire hurts. Essentially, at the firewall, we're just going to damage all players within 2 blocks with 6 fire tick damage. 2 things to note. If you would like to change the damage, make it higher or lower, make this number higher or lower. Additionally, because it is fire tick damage, one thing about this boss is if you have fire resistance armor, it becomes a lot easier. If you have a fire resistance potion, you can essentially take 0 damage from this boss entirely. So, keeping that in mind, if you guys are okay with fire resistance potions making you immune from this guy, then keep this exactly how you see it right now. If you don't want fire resistance to affect anything, like if you want to make sure that no matter if the player has a potion or not, they still have trouble with its boss, you might want to remove fire tick and just leave it blank like this. Finally, if the player's near a firewall, we're just going to give them a little bit of screen shake. This is going to be kind of another alert that, hey, you might want to move, there's fire coming your way. Next up is just going to be the simple teleportation commands. All we're doing is checking at fire 1, teleport it in this direction. Fire 2, the opposite direction. Fire 3, it's the beginning of the coordinates, teleport it that direction. And fire 4, teleport it this direction. If you guys want to make it faster or slower, you can make these numbers like slower, that'll make it slower. You can make it higher, that'll make it faster. However, I found that 0.3 was a pretty good speed where it didn't visually look weird. It was difficult, but not impossible to evade. So I like 0.3, but once again, you guys can adjust that, but try to adjust it for all 4. Otherwise, it would look weird if one direction was just faster than the other directions. Okay, additionally, what we're going to be doing is, this is a little bit funky, but essentially what we're going to be doing is teleporting the firewall up a little bit in this command right here, and this is on a 0 tick delay, but it's on its own chain for unimportant reasons. And then we're going to be teleporting it down half a block. And I know this might seem weird, because it seems like we're just teleporting the thing up and then teleporting the thing down. But because this is on a true, and this one is not, this means that as the fireball is traveling along the ground, imagine that each block is actually a quarter of a block. That's a terrible demonstration. Essentially, as the fireball is traveling along the ground, it's going to go up a quarter of a block. Then it's going to move over. Then it's going to go up a quarter of a block. But then, it can actually go down 0.5 of a block because of the second commands right there. It's going to go back down to the ground. You might think that's weird. Why would we be doing that? Well, essentially, what's going to happen is as it's teleporting along sideways, you're going to see that essentially it's going to occasionally end up inside of a block. Now, because the second command is telling it to always go up, it's actually going to be able to essentially climb up these blocks as it's traveling along. Now, the second command has it teleporting down twice as far as it teleports up. This means that if the firewall is traveling along and it finds itself over the air, then the firewall is actually going to fall down. Essentially, the end effect of what's going on here is that as the firewall is traveling along, like you guys already saw, it's going to be able to climb up and down terrain. Now, if you get something really steep, like up that volcano, it's probably going to have some trouble, but if it's kind of like a fairly flat area with some minor bumps and stuff, it's going to be able to essentially travel along the terrain and have like a fire wall that just travels along the terrain. So it's pretty cool, pretty useful, but I just want to explain what's going on. If you guys have no idea what I just said, if none of that made sense, I apologize. Just follow the commands and it will work. Just trust me. Trust me. Trust me. I'm sorry. Okay. Anyways, so that's it. That's essentially all there is for phase one. Now we're going to get into detecting phase two, which is these. And then this is phase three, which is going to be, obviously we already did the double fireball. So phase three is going to be like the extra shields that you guys saw. So for phase two, what we're doing is we're checking if the blaze, does it have the tag blaze? That means it spawned in normally, but it does not have the tag phase two. And it has a totem with a quantity of 0. That means the totem of undying broke because the player essentially killed the blaze. If that's the case, it's going to give itself the health boost. It's going to give it a little bit higher health boost than phase 1. Then we're going to go straight into the next command block. Same command, it's just giving it instant health. This is basically going to give that blaze all of its health back, a little bit more, and then it's going to heal it right away. Next up, we're going to play a little play animation. Although I added these, I don't think you can even see them, so you can probably skip this command. Then we're going to summon the lightning bolt. This is really going to make sure the players realize, hey, this is phase 2. Then a little extra particle, same reason, just hey, this is phase 2. And finally, we're going to actually give the tag the phase 2 tag. Now, once it has the phase 2 tag, none of these things are going to happen anymore. It's not going to heal again. It's not going to summon multiple things of lightning. So make sure you have this, and this will let you know, hey, the boss is on phase 2. So we already showed how the fireballs work in phase 2 and in phase 1. Let's talk about the little flame shield. So when the blaze is during phase 2, it's going to check, is there an armor stand named F shield within a 25 block radius? If there is not an armor stand named F shield, or flame shield for short, for long, I guess. I don't know. Comments, tell me what I'm probably wrong. Whatever. Anywho, what I want you guys to do is, man, I'm just rambling. I'm gonna keep all of this in. You guys are gonna have to deal with this. Sorry, guys. Essentially, if the blaze does not have an armor stand, it's going to summon an armor stand. Pretty simple. Next up, it's going to constantly teleport this armor stand 10 blocks above the blaze. Then, it's going to cause this armor stand to spin. So essentially, during phase 2 of the boss, the blaze is always going to have an invisible armor stand that is spinning above it. The reason for this is that I thought it would be fun. It does nothing. It's just there. But you know about it. And I know about it. What are you going to do about it? No one's going to believe you. It's invisible. No one's going to believe you. Why is it there? Nobody knows. Nobody. Nah, I'm just kidding. Basically, what we're doing is because we want to have the shield be rotating around the blaze, we want it to be separate from the blaze's own rotation. So it's going to be basically spinning on its own, and we're going to just check which way it's spinning to show where we want to put our particles. So essentially what we're doing here is, and I know this looks kind of weird, we're executing at the flame shield, and we're going 9.2 blocks down, and then we're running this particle 2 blocks out in front of the armor stands. Particle 2, it's going to be similar, 9.2 blocks down, but we're using these coordinates. This kind of puts it at like a backwards angle, if you kind of think of it like a triangle. And then particle 3 is the same thing, except we don't have the negative sign here. So essentially, it kind of leaves us with, imagine you have the blaze right here, particle like here, particle here, and a particle here. That's kind of, I messed up where I placed these. But that's essentially what's happening. This is the blaze. You're going to particle here, here, here. But these are all going to be rotating on their own accord around the blaze. Finally, we're going to give the F shield invisibility because otherwise they would know about the armor stand that's floating above it. We don't want them to know. So let's move into what's actually happening with the flame shield. So we're going to use the same coordinates that we did for the actual particles. We're going 9.2 blocks down and then 2 blocks forward. And we're just going to be damaging any player that enters 1.4 blocks, doing 6 damage. Once again, you can increase or decrease this damage number. It's up to you. We're doing the same thing with the other 2 sets of coordinates. So negative 1.4, negative 1.4, positive 1.4, then negative 1.4. Then essentially we're going to have it so if an arrow kind of gets near the phase 2 boss, it's just going to kill the arrow. This way it kind of works as like a semi-shield, but we have the range low enough that some arrows can get through, so it's kind of like sometimes you can find a chip in the shield. The issue with having actual shields is that the kill command on arrows can be inconsistent sometimes because of how fast arrows fly. So doing it this way just kind of makes it so that arrows sometimes get through, but not always. Finally, we have self-die. So if there is no blaze nearby, the flame shield's going to kill itself because then it would be a floating blaze of fire on the grounds, and that would be weird. Anyways, that is it for the tutorial. I hope you guys enjoyed. This was something made on live stream, kind of voted and adjusted, and you guys actually got to influence essentially what I made here. So if you guys are interested in telling me what to do, make sure you just keep an eye out on my live streams. I'm really bad at scheduling them, and I apologize. Just have your notification bell on if you want to catch those live streams. I'm not saying that like typical YouTuber fashion. I just don't schedule my live streams. Additionally, if you made it to the end of the tutorial, in your comments, include your favorite color. This is only going to be for people who actually made it to the end of the tutorial, so if you want to show me that you actually made it to the end, comment your favorite color. And then we all know who the fakers are when they don't say their favorite color. Don't even say my favorite color is. Just somewhere in your comment, just include the name of your favorite color. Don't say that it is your favorite color. Just include the color to confuse people who didn't make it to all the way to the end. Additionally, if you guys need help, join the Discord. And yeah, I don't know. I'm just rambling. Apologies that I have not posted in a while. Gonna get back to it soon, but college takes time. Alright, go enjoy the full fight. Bye. Hope I'm ready for this fight. Okay, that's phase 2. He has shields. I gotta avoid the flame shields. I did it!